Hi, what's going on guys? Welcome to another Next.js 13 video. Today we are going to cover everything related to data fetching. So if you're interested to see the routing in Next.js 13, I highly recommend you to check out the previous video that I did about routing to cover everything you need to know to get started. So this video is going to be divided into two parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about some theory about the data fetching, especially the fetch API. And in the second part, I'm going to show you a little app that I created with the greatest API, the Pokemon API. And we're going to see a real world example with fetching. So for example, you can see that we have here the pagination for Pokemons. So you can click on each of the Pokemons. For example, I click on the Pikachu one, and you can see that I'm fetching more information about the Pokemon. And of course, we have this search over here. So let's try to actually search for some Pokemon. So I don't know, for example, let's pick a name from the list. So for example, Spiro. All right, let's try to search for this one. Spiro, like this. By the way, the search is debouncing, so only when I stop for half a second, only then I'm going to search for the data. And you can see that when I don't have any Pokemon with that name, I'm going to receive Pokemon not found string like this. And when we delete the search, we're going to go back to the home page basically. All right. So you get the point. It's pretty simple application, but it's a good demonstration of the fetching in Nextjs 13. So first of all, let's go through the fetch API. Next.js 13 is actually extending the fetch API, the regular web fetch API with their own. And you can see, for example, here we have a server component of page.tsx. And you can see that I can just use async function to fetch some data. So for example, response is going to be fetch and we're going to fetch some external API. Then we're going to check if the response dot status is not going to be okay, then I'm going to throw an error like this. Otherwise, I will return the response.json like this. And we can just use async await inside the server-side pages. So you can see here that we define this page to be async function, and we're just awaiting the data with the await get data function that we defined over here. And it's very simple, very straightforward. There are some also caching options, so you can add the cache option that you want to use. So for example, here they use force cache. And yeah, there is actually a lot of things that you can do about caching. I'm not going to go through into it in deep because I didn't try all of these options, but another thing that you can do is to have revalidation. Okay, and you can just export revalidation revalidation constant in the page level like this, and that means that the data will be revalidated every hour basically, so it won't be cached forever. And yeah, so as you can see, some more examples like this. You can actually revalidate on tags, and you can do some more advanced stuff that I haven't tried yet in the caching. But yeah, and the last thing that I want to say about fetching is if you're using client-side fetching, they actually recommend to use a library like SWR or React Query. I personally used React Query in my projects, and I liked it very much. Not sure about this one, but React Query is very recommended. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about server actions and all these sections here because this is still in alpha, and I'm not going to cover this until it's actually stable. Okay, so before we dive to the code, I want to show you an overview of the structure of the project and how the component actually communicate between each other. So as you can see here, we have the root page with which is actually the home page. and we have the slash Pokemon page, which is going to be a dynamic name of the Pokemon. Okay, so if we go to slash Pikachu, it will show Pikachu. And we have three leaves, which are client components. So you can think about, I call them leaves because they are actually sit inside the page. So we have the pagination leaf. Let me actually show you in the UI. So if we go back over here, the pagination is these two buttons at the bottom here. So these two buttons are client components, and you can see when I click on next or previous, it pushes the query params with offset and limit. So this is actually doing a route change to the next and previous links from the Pokemon API. So this is the pagination leaf. The search leaf is another client component. So if you look at this search, this thing is also a client component that pushes the URL. So for example, if I say, let's just write test or whatever, you can see that this search component is pushing the URL to /test. And the last one is the Pokemon name leaf. So if you go back again, and when I click on some Pokemon, so I click on Nidoking, okay? And this is also pushing the URL to the Pokemon page, okay? So /Pokemon is just um, the Pokemon page that you can see in the diagram over here, okay? So very simple, very straightforward, but you can see how the client components are just responsible for mutating the URL, okay? And the home itself and the Pokemon page server components are responsible for fetching the data. So this is basically it for the diagram, and let's go to the code now. Now, when you understand the diagram properly, I can go easily through the code. So you can see here we have the root page with the layout, and we have the Pokemon page with the dynamic ID. This is actually a name, but it doesn't matter. I can call it however I want. So inside the Pokemon's root page, we have the function here. You don't need to care about the interfaces. It's just to make my life easier and have some autocompletes. So what we need to look at is this get Pokemon's function that actually fetches the Pokemons. Okay, so we can see that we have here, I'm passing the search params, and I can get the offset and the limit. And I can say that if I have offset and limit, the query string is going to be like this, okay? And then I want to try to fetch the Pokemons from the Pokemon's API with the query string. The method is going to be get by default, but I like to specify it anyway. And you can see that if we have some kind of error, I'm going to throw this error. Otherwise, I return the response.json. Very straightforward. So get Pokemon's function is being used in our page like this. So the root page is async. I can destructure the search params from the page and use the search params in the get Pokemon's function and to get the Pokemon's response like this. Very easy. Now here I am checking, first of all, I'm checking if I have length, then I want to map through the results. And for each Pokemon, basically, I'm displaying this Pokemon name component, which is a client component that I can click on and then go change my URL according to the Pokemon name, okay? And here is the Pokemon name, and here is the pagination at the bottom, okay? So the pagination is going to receive next and previous, which are coming from the Pokemon's response. So the Pokemon's response, you can see that they have a count, they have next, previous, and results of Pokemons. So very straightforward over here. And now let's go to the Pokemon name. I just want to show you what happens when I click on the Pokemon name. So if we go to this component, Pokemon name, you can see that I'm using here use client, which is a client component. And here we have the router from next navigation. And on click, I'm just going to router.push to the Pokemon name. And that's it basically. Okay, so when I click on the Pokemon name, I'm going to use this function handle click. So now let's look at also the pagination component. So in the pagination component, I'm going to receive the next and previous, and I'm going to do the same thing. So if handle next, if I have next. So first of all, if I don't, if next is null, I'm not going to do anything. And if we have next, I want to destructure the query string. So I'm getting the query string from the next link, and I'm pushing the router to this query string. So the same thing for previous, just the opposite. I'm then going to check for previous in this case. And yeah, that's it. On click, I have handle previous, and on click, I have handle next. So the pagination is just changing the URL. And same thing with the search. So the search is a client component. Here I have some utility function that I created of use debounce. Doesn't really matter, but you can check it in the code later. And I have the debounced value. And if I have debounced search, I'm going to push the URL to the debounced search. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to just push to the home page. Now, lastly, we can look at the Pokemon page itself. So the dynamic Pokemon page. And here, what we have another fetch request. Okay, so get Pokemon is going to fetch the API slash Pokemon slash the Pokemon that I provide here. The method is going to be get. Again, we throw error and we return the res.json. So the Pokemon name, we are getting it from the params of the URL, and we use the get Pokemon with the Pokemon name. Alright, so that was the little app with the Pokemon's API. And that's it. In the next part, we're going to cover a REST API that I'm going to create with Nextjs 13. We're going to connect it to PlanetScale, and it's going to be a little bit more advanced than this one. So we're going to use a real database, and we're going to use to create our own REST API in the Nextjs API folder. Okay, so we haven't done it in this part because we didn't have to. We have this external API that we're fetching. So don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you liked it. And I will see you the next one. Bye and thank you for watching.